welcome back to Gardening with Creations by DX & Co. It is a beautifully sunny day out here and I am building another raised bed. You guys all know I like to garden in raised beds. Thought I'd show you the style that we're building this time. Let's get started. Most of you guys know I like to build the wood raised beds. These are just standard 2x6s, 2 high, 4 foot by 8 foot. I like my 4 foot pathways in between. And then of course my elevated raised bed that I currently have all my herbs in. Just a little update for you guys. A couple years old now, still holding up fine and works very well still. And the tarp underneath it was a great idea to keep all the weeds down. That was probably the most annoying part of an elevated raised bed, but it's very nice on the back. And this is how we traditionally do our raised beds. Let me show you what we're using now. So we've decided here to, with the cost of lumber being so high, I had these cinder blocks on hand that I got for free off of Marketplace. And so I was starting my raised bed with them, and I wasn't going to record, but I thought, you know, there's a lot of people out there that need to know that you can also do it this way. So wanted to just kind of show you guys a couple of things. I wanted to stick with my 4x8 footprint. Now, unfortunately, the inside is a little less, and I'll go over some pros and cons in a couple minutes here, but I want to show you the cinder blocks first. But I wanted my 4x8 footprint. So it turned out that 5 on the inside and 3 on the outside were roughly kept my 4x8 footprint. So that's why we did it this way, 3 on the outside. And then when you stack it on top, you end up your next layer, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6. So now when you're stacking them, the important part is you want to stack over top of 2. So that's the middle. That way it actually offsets it, helps stabilize it so nothing's falling over. And you can go as high as you want with these. Now the other great part with these is I can plant marigolds around here or flowers all in these little pockets. Or if you're like me and you like to sit down on the edge of your garden and garden, you can get these decorative caps like this for very cheap, a couple dollars a piece. So they're just a solid cap and you can just set them all around and sit on it. So I'm gonna go 2 high, which ironically is higher than my other beds just because of how tall these are. But it's that simple. Now if you want to get crazy, you can absolutely get a bonding agent, stick these together so that they never fall over. But the great thing about these cinder blocks is you can go as little of a bed as you want or as long as a bed as you want. There's no limit to the length of lumber, if you will, right? So you can just go ahead and I could make a bed as long as my garden of just cinder blocks and stack it as high as I wanted to, and it's that simple. Now, I'll go over some pros and cons here of the actual cinder block style raised beds so you guys can actually decide if it's right for you. But I wanted to show you guys that there are other options out there than just lumber when it comes to raised beds. Some pros about using cinder blocks. One thing to point out here is that there is a difference between a cinder block and a concrete block. Concrete blocks are traditionally what are used to actually build foundations for houses. Cinder blocks are built a little bit differently. You can do some research on them, but cinder blocks have a little bit more things in them than and they're traditionally a little bit more frail than a concrete block. So a cinder block is something that you would use for a retaining wall or raised bed, things like that. Concrete blocks are usually more for heavy construction. So just wanted to point those differences out. But let's talk about some pros to using cinder blocks as a raised bed. Number one, they're pretty inexpensive. A single block itself that I just looked up at a big box store is about $1.57 a piece. I mean, that's pretty cheap when it comes to being able to customize something like this. The cap itself, these things that I have on top that I'm sitting on, they are a little bit more pricey at $2.28 a piece, but look, I didn't need as many caps as I did blocks, so something to keep in mind. The other thing is that they're really easy to find. Now, I mentioned I got all of mine for free. I did get mine from the marketplace, and that is something that can be a pro or a con, but for me, it was obviously a pro. And so you can easily find them. You can find them almost at any big box store as far as that's concerned. And by big box, I mean big box hardware store, not necessarily big box as in like your Walmarts or stores like that. They are long lasting. I mean, whereas traditional wooden raised beds are great and definitely have pros and a few cons, they do tend to rot out. Whereas a cinder block isn't going to rot out on you, and it's going to be a lot longer lasting. They are easily stackable, as you can see. I could stack these 3 or 4 or 5 high and have some confidence that they're going to do just fine. You have a lot of flexibility, as I mentioned, in the design. So right now I've done a simple 4x8 rectangular raised bed. However, I could easily do an L shape, a corner. I can do anything that I want with this design when it comes to these blocks. It's a lot easier to do without having to make any cuts. And another huge thing is cinder blocks actually do come in half sizes as well. So if you just wanted the half of the cinder block, one circle if you will, or one square opening instead of 2, you can actually get them in half sizes even if you needed to make that small angle. Now let's talk about some cons. Those are the main pros, right? And there's some cons here that definitely are to be considered, and some of those can be slight pros, and I'll explain here what I mean. So the cons, which could potentially be a pro, is they hold a lot of heat. And so your soil actually tends to stay warmer in a cinder block style raised bed. Now, one of the things to keep in mind with that is in the spring in the upper parts of the United States or in England in the spring, actually that can be a pro, because what that means is that actually warm into the bed in the spring and the fall and keeping your plants possibly warmer longer. But in the summer, that can be a big con because your soil can be too hot and therefore it can burn the roots of your plants. So it's something to keep in mind. Now, shipping costs. If you were to have these delivered, right, that is actually something that can be very costly. So if you're not going to go to the store yourself and actually pick these up and you're going to deliver them, the freight cost could be astronomical just because of the weight. If you compare the weight of lumber to the weight of cinder blocks, it's insane. I actually did the math. I brought all of these cinder blocks home plus the caps from where I picked them up at. I filled the bed of my truck and I was actually over my limit on my weight capacity of my truck when I did it. And so I drove home really slow, so it's something to keep in mind. These are extremely heavy. That's another con. The fact that these are actually so heavy, it's not for everybody to be able to carry and put these in place. You might actually need to hire somebody if you have a bad back or unable to lift heavy things, so on and so forth. It's long lasting, so if you do it, you know, if you hire somebody, you probably just have to hire them once as opposed to a wood bed where you might have to do it every couple of years, right? But this is something that I'm actually sore right now from putting this together because I spent the day carrying all these cinder blocks just from one end of my yard to the other. Imagine picking them up from the store and bringing them home. Something else to keep in mind, that these are very heavy. They do actually have the potential to leak some chemicals into the soil, and I'm going to talk about how you can avoid that as well. But they do have potential to leak chemicals in the soil, especially non-aged ones, brand new ones, that sort of thing. They actually are made with lime at times. Concrete can leach lime into the soil. And what that can do actually is another con. It can lower your soil's pH balance. So you can get very acidic soil, which isn't obviously good for certain types of crops, right? Blueberries love lime, like blueberry bushes, things like that. But that doesn't mean the chemicals that some of these leach sometimes are all just lime. It could be other things. And so vegetable gardening is sometimes a con when it comes to cinder blocks. And that's pretty much the pros and cons here. But let's talk about that leaching part that I talked about. What can you do to avoid leaching from the cinder block into your soil? Well, one of the things you can actually do to avoid it is you can paint these, right? So cinder blocks are something that's easily paintable. Now, you want to use a water-based acrylic paint. That's what you will find is safe for gardens. They're non-toxic, okay? So I would actually just do some research, but you definitely can get a water-based acrylic non-toxic paint, and that is safe for painting your raised beds, whether they be cinder blocks or being you know, your elevated raised beds or your regular raised beds, whatever. You can actually use a water-based non-acrylic paint, and that'll keep these from actually being in direct contact with the soil and avoid leaching. Now, another thing that you can do is actually use a liner on the inside of these. So you may have noticed on the ground here I have tarp everywhere, and that was really about killing the weeds, and then I eventually want to put some things down over top of this for my pathway. But one of the things that you can do is line this all with a tarp or a fabric or even a pond liner, right? And that will actually stop this from being in direct contact with the soil, again, avoiding leaching directly from the blocks. So there's a lot of options that will still be more cost effective than potentially lumber at that point. So something to keep in mind here, guys, and I definitely wanted to go through all those pros and cons here with you, make sure that you guys had all the right information before going into building something like this for yourself. But as you can see, this is just fantastic, almost the perfect height. I'm even considering going one layer higher, but I can sit nice and comfortably on here, weed with this. I don't have to worry about stability at all. There's no bowing in it whatsoever. There is no potential for this to rot out anytime soon, right? These are going to last me years upon years. So, and it was free, and you guys know how I like free stuff. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you learned a little bit from something of it. Again, my name's Adam. I hope you guys are staying safe and enjoying your gardens. Thanks for watching.